All right. I think we should
Okay.
be recording now. Um, yeah, so I was thinking, I was reading your story, both your original post and the success story after that. Um, and one of the questions that I always sort of have for when I was reading yours and other people's stories of on the forum was what what in the beginning in the first place why did people start taking antidepressants, like what led you to antidepressants and psychiatric drugs in general.
Great question. Yeah. Like, what is it that happens in a person's life where that seems like a good idea, right? So, um, the first thing I think I would say is that I started taking antidepressants and anti-anxiety medication, benzodiazepines, in 1991. And so this was really actually when Zoloft, Paxil, a lot of Prozac just came out, is when those SSRIs just first started coming out. So the SSRIs had just first started coming out, and I was in a situation where I was having really intense panic attacks. That's what led me to take that. Um, a lot of the perspective that I have now on how that all unfolded is different than what my viewpoint was at the time. At the time, it felt like something out of the blue hitting me and me not knowing what it was and just feeling really intensely scary. Um, so for me, there's different approaches to the diagnosis of a panic disorder. Some are very biological, like your chest, the heart feels like it's beating out of your chest, suffocation. That's not what I experienced. Mine was much more psychologically scary. Um, to me, it was really, I would compare it to the experience of a bad trip on a hallucinogen and feeling like it's not going to end. So, for those people that have had that experience, that's sort of what I would compare it to. It's just sort of this state of terror and confusion, disorientation, and not sure when that's going to end. So that was the experience that I was having. I didn't know why it was happening, and um, my mom was a family therapist, and she said, "It sounds like you're having panic attacks," and so she suggested I go see a psychiatrist. I went to go see the psychiatrist, and he said, "Well, there's these wonderful new drugs out that are out right now, and it sounds like you have a panic disorder, and you have some depression, and there's these new drugs out, and what you have is a chemical imbalance. And what we do is we take these drugs and it takes care of the chemical balance." And like many, many people who have been talked to from professionals about how this works, they use the analogy of it being like a diabetic with insulin. So just like a diabetic needs insulin, and so you need these because you have a chemical imbalance. And so once you take these, it'll make everything better. And we might need to do some adjustments to it, and maybe one works better than the other, but that's what he suggested. And so that's what I did. I actually took dicipramine at the beginning, which was sort of a precursor to the SSRIs. But pretty quickly I got onto the SSRIs. And so I was taking lorazepam and I was taking Zoloft. Those are the drugs that I was taking. And quite honestly, it made it so I didn't have the panic attacks in the way that I had. And I also was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder. GAD. And so it really helped with some of the anxiety, and it didn't take everything away. It took the panic attacks away for the most part. The anxiety that I had was still very intense in the mornings, but I would take the drugs in the morning and it would pass. And then it sort of made it so that life was doable. And that's kind of what I did. And I did that. Um, I did that for about a year or so, and I was really sort of on the idea that maybe I could get off of these. And he said, if we can get off of these, that's probably a good idea. I'd also taken a look at my drinking around that time, and I was doing therapy with him in that year, and he suggested I stop drinking, and I did. I actually stopped drinking too, and so that all happened, and then I started to try to get off. He said, first, what you want to do is you want to get off the benzos first. And I would start to try to get off of those. And pretty quickly, I would start having really intense anxiety again. And I would start having sort of feeling panicky again. And so there was over the years, there were times over the years that I would try to decrease that, and sort of thinking, maybe I should try to get off of these. But every time I did, it just made things really bad. Everything that I took it for sort of came back, and it felt like it was worse. So I just stayed on them, and um, so I ended up being on them for about 25 years. So it was from 1991 to about 2014. 2014 is when I stopped drinking. And then that summer of 2014 is when I decided, I need to get off these things. And so I also recognized that probably I needed to stop drinking. And so I quit drinking first. And I quit drinking on April 1st of 2014. And it was April Fool's Day. And it just was around that time, and it was a fun date. So that just worked out that way. And it may not have been exactly that date, but that's kind of what I go with. So I quit drinking on April 1st. And it was actually pretty okay, because quite honestly, I'd cut back on drinking already. I was just so, at that point in my life, I was in such a compromised state that I just knew I fundamentally needed to make changes in my life, that whatever was going on was not working. And so the drinking was the first piece. And I would drink, it got to a point where I would drink on a Friday night, and I would basically, I would call it a hangover. I felt hungover at least through the weekend, waking up with just excruciating anxiety, and just really just, I couldn't get out of bed. I mean, it was awful. And so, quitting drinking, well, on the one hand, it was a social outlet for me, and it took care of a lot of my social anxiety, so I was more extroverted. But at the same time, there was a lot of issues. So whatever benefits that I had found in drinking weren't benefits really to me anymore, and I could see that in 2014. So drinking, thankfully, I was able to let go of pretty easily. I just knew that it was time. And then I had the idea, well, I think it's time to get off these drugs too. And every morning it was just like, I don't know if you know the movie Groundhog's Day, but you sort of wake up and it's the same thing over and over again. And that's what it felt like. It just felt like every day waking up was just another day of drudgery. And I just had this sense. And the other thing too that I was experiencing was, in the morning, I felt intensely contracted. I felt scared. I felt terrified, maybe like a small child, right? And I woke up with just sort of the terror of facing another day. And then at the end of the day, I was very inflated, I guess is the word I would use. It was the energy of everything that maybe I didn't pull off during that day, and how I was going to do it better the next day, and sort of these ideas of just how I was going to get back up on that horse and it was going to be better. And that was that Groundhog Day quality. The morning waking up feeling completely hungover and anxious, and like I didn't want to face another day. And then throughout the day, I would start to feel better, feel more energetic. And then by evening, I was so energized that I couldn't even fall asleep again. So I had a lot of sleep issue has been a big issue for me. So anyway, I just, at that point in 2014, after I quit drinking, I just felt as though it was time to get off these drugs. And something in me just told me that whatever benefit there had been to them, I just didn't want to live like that anymore. And I needed to get off of them. So I talked to my doctor about it. And it was, quite honestly, I hadn't seen a psychiatrist in years and years and years. It was just always my general doctor who was always prescribing them over those 25 years. And so I talked to her, and she said, let's get off of these, in her opinion at that time, slowly. Let's taper off of them. And so the summer of 2014, I tapered off the drugs, and I followed the doctor's orders. And so the first half of the summer, for about 2 months, I tapered off of the lorazepam, the benzodiazepines. And during that time, I felt really intense anxiety. It was just really, really, really awful. And so I actually quit caffeine at that time also. So I was like at least a pot a day. So I was waking so contracted in the mornings, and it was so hard to get moving. Well, I would just sort of supplement that and sort of give myself a wake up in the morning with a pot or two of coffee, literally. So, but it was clear to me the caffeine at that time was just not doing me any good. And so I actually quit drinking coffee at that time also. And then I was off the benzos, and then it was time to get off the Zoloft. And so again, over about a 2-month period, I got off of the Zoloft, and I got it to 0 on everything. And it was tough, and I had a lot of anxiety, and I was able to sort of get through the day. And I had a lot of other issues going on in my life, which I'll talk about maybe a little bit later, but I was able to get by. And I felt like I had accomplished something when I got to zero on that. And it was September of that year. And it was about 6 weeks later, maybe mid-October, when, quite honestly, in whatever language I can use here or not, I don't know, but the shit hit the fan. And everything just completely went really bad. And I started having panic attacks like I hadn't had probably since 1991. And it was awful. It was really awful. It was terrifying. It was awful. And I was like, well, maybe if I just, take a little bit of the, reinstate a little bit. I was, so I took maybe a little Zoloft here just to take the edge off. I'm sorry, a little lorazepam to take the edge off. And I had a few of those pills left. Eventually I went to the doctor and I was like, I think I just need to get back on everything. This just isn't working. And so instead of reinstating to what I had originally been on, she said, well, there's newer drugs now these days, right? And, these are better than the drugs that you had been on. And so let's maybe try some of those. And so I went on about an 8-month drug chase of really trying to find something that would stabilize me and something that would help me stop having panic attacks, try to decrease the anxiety. And it was about 8 months of trying, maybe 4 different types of antidepressants, 3 different types of benzodiazepines, and it was a mess. And so finally I got to a place where it was somewhat okay. And it was taking Zoloft, and I switched the benzo from lorazepam to clonazepam. And I had moved at that time also, and I connected up with a psychiatric nurse practitioner who's very sort of the traditional old school type. And she too was just kept increasing. It's like, nope, we need more Zoloft, and then let's add some Remeron onto that, and to help you sleep, and you're not getting the sleep. And so, and it just sort of, and so I was on the same things that I had been on essentially, but more of them plus Remeron, plus a whole nother drug. And I was in a pretty discouraged place, quite honestly. And then I found Robert Whitaker's book, Anatomy of an Epidemic. And I found the Surviving Antidepressants website, and another website at the time, Benzo Buddies, I think is what it was called. And I just knew that I had found truth. I knew that it affirmed sort of my suspicions that, whatever benefit there may have been taking this at the beginning, and it just long-term probably was not a good idea. And I had taken these things for over 25 years. And I'd started taking these SSRIs at the very beginning when they first came out. So there was no research. There was nothing showing me a path. I was sort of the one who had been on it the longest. And there was nothing to tell me what happens when you try to get off of these things, other than you've got a chemical imbalance and like you need to take these drugs. So, I have some research background. And so, Robert Whitaker's book, it was convincing to me, and he asked a lot of really good questions in that book. And I just started to educate myself more and more. And I was like, I'm going to get off these drugs, but I need to go much more slowly than I had gone last time. And that was the plan. That's what I ended up doing. I started off not going as slowly as what the Surviving Antidepressants website suggested, at sort of 10% from the current dose per month or per 6 weeks. But I was in a pretty disabled state at that point. Quite honestly, my brain was scrambled. I'm sure it was. And I was really injured at that point. And luckily I had built up some savings. And I just sort of accepted the fact that I was going to be pretty debilitated. I didn't apply for disability. I had some savings, and so I've been living on that. And it was a horrific experience, quite honestly, getting off these drugs. It was a horror show. The other thing that happened to me around that time was that I had found a peer support program, a 12-step program, Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families, also known as ACA or ACOA. And so as I was getting off of these drugs, I knew that long-term the drugs were not a good plan. And I understood sort of the processes of chemical addiction and how they applied to psychiatric drugs, just like they apply to street drugs. And that through neuroplasticity of my brain needed to go through a changing process, and it was going to take some time. But I questioned, I took these drugs originally because I was having panic attacks. And so for me, my journey has involved questioning, why is it that I needed to originally take those drugs? And is there something underlying that I needed to take a look at? So the Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families program looks at childhood trauma. And so that's the other work that I've been doing, is to recognize that those panic attacks that I had were resulting from something that happened to me, early on. And since I've been doing this work, it's been very clear to me that I can remember my first panic attack before I ever took a hallucinogenic drug. So, while I had taken a hallucinogenic drug, and I think my brain recognized that as that experience, I was having those experiences before I ever found those drugs. And it was probably at age 13, maybe 14. 14 is when I had my first panic attack. And I can look back and recognize now that I'd been living with anxiety probably, very early on. And my mom was an alcoholic, and my dad had his issues also. He was a workaholic, and both of them had childhoods that were dysfunctional, and affected who they were as adults and affected who they were as parents. And so we talk about the intergenerational aspect of childhood dysfunction and family trauma. And so I've been working on addressing that stuff too these past few years. So for me, my journey of tapering and getting off the psychiatric drugs has also been a journey of revisiting my childhood wounding and working with that and healing that. And I'm thankful that I found the ACA program, and I found in particular one therapist who did EMDR, the trauma healing modality, that worked well for me and opened things up. And so to this day, I will never know, these past few years, the discomfort that I experienced. I don't know how much of that can be attributed to the actual withdrawal, and how much would be attributed to trauma healing and sort of experiencing that. What I do notice is that in these circles, there's not a whole lot of overlap that I've found. The people who are doing the inner trauma work and getting off the psychiatric drugs at the same time, I have found a few. But what I found in these circles is that the symptoms of each camp are very similar. And I don't know how to explain that really, other than to say, I think for me, getting off the psychiatric drugs, it took off the dampening that I was experiencing of the symptoms that I had resulting from childhood trauma. And the way that withdrawal works is it exacerbates that. So I think as people go in and start to deal with the early wounding, it's very similar to the effects of pulling away the drugs and having those experiences come and become amplified. So people who are going through childhood trauma healing, the symptoms and what they experience and the circles that I was around were very similar to the things that people who getting off the drugs were experiencing too. So I don't know how much for myself was as a result of the tapering, how much was doing the childhood trauma healing. But I had both going on at the same time. And it knocked me on my butt for about 4 years. And what I can say is at this point, I've been off of psychiatric drugs for about 1.5 years, and I'm okay. I'm okay. In fact, I am more alive probably than I have been since I can remember. And by that, I mean feeling a full range of emotions, to feel a full range of emotions, and to have a fluidity in my consciousness that I think the drugs dampened. So, and you'll notice I'm calling them drugs. I'm not calling them medication. To me, they're drugs. And, benzodiazepines to me are alcohol in pill form. They affect the same neurotransmitters. And so, probably in a sense, having it in a pill form, at least it's measurable and sort of what you're taking. So there might be a benefit to that. But I was drugged for all of my adult life for 25 years. And so when I came off of them, it was like I was picking up where I was 21 again. And I was sort of feeling the intensity of being fully alive and not drugged. And that was a lot to adjust to. And it is still a lot to adjust to. So I'm still healing. It's very clear to me that I think my brain itself, just my brain is still going through a physiological healing process. And then just experientially, I'm still adjusting to what it's like to have a full range of my senses. I mean, even to the extent that, like, as I was off of these drugs, I would smell jasmine half a block away when it was blooming. Like, I'd never experienced that, and I never knew that I wasn't experiencing that. So, whether it's just the senses that we're talking about that are all deadened and numbed, or whether it's the full range of emotions, I mean, sadness, fear, anger, all of these things, it was just like I had been in a sound booth, and insulated from all of these experiences. And then sort of the taper is sort of peeling those away slowly. Because, my God, if you rip all of that off at the same time, that's what I experienced that 6 months after the taper had gone too fast. It was pulling off a blanket of denial at some level, a denial that I came out of my childhood with, but a blanket of numbing from the drugs that that I didn't even know that I had been living with until they came off. And for me, experientially, I've had to adjust to what that's like, to really feel, to be alive with a full range of emotions, and then to learn how to deal with that. I mean, it's learning a completely new way of living. So that's the nickel tour of the drug experience. You asked me specifically what led me to taking those drugs, and it was panic attacks. But what I can say is it was childhood wounding that led me to take those drugs. And, what I would do is I would point people to the ACEs study, Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, which was started, I think, in 1992 by Kaiser and CDC. But it's very clear, the more adversity people experience in childhood, the more problems in a myriad of ways that they experience in adulthood. Whether it's psychiatric issues, whether it's just flat out health issues, cancer, whether it's incarceration, any of these things. And so there is a direct link between the adversity people experience in childhood, the lack of attunement and attachment and caring and safety and nurturing and guidance. There's a direct connection between that, not getting those things, and experiencing difficulties in adulthood. And so ACA's solution is to become your own loving parent. And so the idea is to reparent myself and to give myself the tender parts of myself, what I didn't get when I needed them as a kid, and to connect into that and to give them to myself as an adult. And so the other piece that I would say in describing the shift has been working with a critical part of myself, right? So in childhood, to keep me safe, I needed to develop a way to move about life. And the models that I had were not based in tenderness and attunement and presence and compassion. And in the absence of that, as a kid, I reached for what I needed to keep me safe and to keep me moving. And it was a harshness and a criticalness. And it was, if you think of the carrot and the whip, it was the whip, right? And so that's that critic. What I would say today is the critic is how I built my resume, right? The critic is what drove me to be pretty much the hero child. And as compromised as I have been my whole life, I have been able to achieve a lot of things. I was the hero child, and the way I felt okay about myself was to achieve and to do what I can to make people like me, to approve of me, and to please people so that I could feel like maybe I had earned my place in the world. And so that critic is what drove that for me. And for me, my recovery work has been a process of releasing that critic, transforming the critic maybe, and recognizing that it served a purpose for me. It kept me alive, but that I wanted to develop a different way of moving in the world. Call it more love-based or more compassion-based. I guess a respect for the tenderness, what I would call my inner children, a tenderness for myself and connecting into that, and to not beat myself into moving forward in life in the ways that I think people expect of me, but to connect into the gifts that I've been given, and to share that with people in ways that are healthy and safe. And that transformation of moving from having that critic internal talk, the self-talk we talk about, having that being so harsh and so cruel. And realistically, I'll be honest that, sometimes that would be directed outward too. I mean, I could deflect that from not being focused on myself. I could deflect that into focusing that on other people. Now, usually that didn't escape my mouth because I was Lou the nice guy, right? But in my head, I mean, that was always there. It was just always this critical, not good enough way of looking at the world, with myself and the people in it. So there's a gentleness. ACA talks about how we learn to do things with gentleness, humor, love, and respect. And so finding that gentleness has been a process of this drug taper also, because the harshness in the taper did not serve me. And when I kept beating up on myself, and I would put myself on that clock and I'd be like, I'm not going fast enough and I should be doing more. That was the challenge. That was my battle. That was my internal battle. The drugs were the fodder for me to learn in that battle. And it was learning how to turn towards a gentler way of moving in the world, and moving in a way that allowed me to release those drugs over time, and to be patient, and to find what had evaded me most of my life. And that was some sort of gray area, some sort of middle ground where it could just be okay, to find an abiding okayness in the world, that I'm okay. It's okay, and I'm okay, and it's going to be okay. Because that's not what drove me most of my life, Georgia. It's what drove me was that things weren't okay, and I needed to get on it, and I needed to get on it now, and day after day. And so, of course, every morning I would wake up and feel a sense of contraction, because I was facing the world with that going on inside of me. And it makes sense to me. Every night I would be kept up at night with ruminations of how I could have done better, and how I would do better the next day, because that was the critic, beating up on me day in and day out. And that's no way to live. And I would say, on the one sense, the drugs saved my life, and on the other sense, they tried to kill me. Right? They kept things at bay to the degree that I didn't need to work with them in a way that would transform my life. And I do have a lot of anger at the medical communities, the mental health communities that lied to me. And there are definitely entities and folks that have profited off of the lies. And I'm grateful that people like Robert Whitaker and a lot of people in the field now today who are pushing, looking at things in a more accurate way, to recognize maybe drugs do have a place in an emergency. Maybe when things get too bad, we need to reach for a drug, but let's just call it a drug, right? Let's just call it what it is and recognize that's not the place where people need to land. And, we have a lot of things in this world that don't serve us well as human beings, and especially in US culture right now, and my hope is that gentleness, humor, love, and respect will serve me in not only changing my life, but maybe making a difference in the world too. So that's my overview comments.
Wow. Yeah, this is sorry. This is amazing. I have just so much respect for you and everybody who's had to go through anything even close to what you had to go through, and just the SA community in general and everybody on there. It's amazing. I have so much respect for you guys, and it's incredible that you were able to go through this and emerge like stronger. And the way that you speak about it now, you're just like so calm and eloquent, and just like you've sort of accepted that this is your past, and you're able to to continue knowing that this is your past, but at the same time, accepting it and growing and learning from it, and essentially becoming a better version of yourself. This was awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah,
Well,
this was amazing. Just wanted to ask you something else as well. You talked a lot about ACA, and how it helped you through the whole process. I was wondering if there was something else that also helped you go through this. Did you have like the support of your family or friends, or if there were, if you were doing something in specific that helped you understand yourself better, and understand this inner critic better, and accept it, and sort of work with it.
yeah, sure. Um, so the first thing I would say is I don't completely follow the SA party line. I completely agree with the idea of tapering. But I have some differing opinions on that too. I also don't fully agree with the ACA party line all the time, right? So it's been sort of a combination of things. And I bring the different perspectives in to sort of create my own path, right? I think that's what people do. So from the surviving antidepressants perspective, or just call it maybe the deprescribing perspective, I think a lot of it is focused on if you go slow enough, it will be okay. And I think in a sense that's true. I really do. I think if you go slow enough, if you approach this change slowly enough, and you don't have the abruptness that comes along with it, that's going to be your best bet. And so I think some people just sort of have that perspective and sort of go along that line. And, I think some people can pull that off. What I do also agree with the Surviving Antidepressants website is there's a lot of focus on self-care. Okay, so for me, that self-care, I put in the context of that ACA reparenting term, right? It sort of encompasses that. There's an emotional self-care, but there's also a physical self-care, and a psychological self-care, and a spiritual self-care. So what I used to replace the drugs was self-care. And to me, the reparenting, the ACA perspective, was a methodology in a sense. It was sort of, how can I do that gently, right? How can I mean, quite honestly, self-care was really the last thing that I wanted to do. It was not modeled for me in childhood. And for me, being that guy that's like always looking for the pats on the back, you don't get a lot of pats on the back for self-care, right? They don't have self-care awards that you get. At least I don't know of them. But anything that falls under the category of self-care is essential in getting off of these drugs. That's my truth. And that's going to be different for different people. For me, for a while, self-care was really focusing on sleep and sleep hygiene, right? I struggled with sleep. I struggled with sleep as long as I could remember. And then as I've done more of this inner work, it's very clear to me I've struggled with sleep since a very, very early age. And so there are ways of looking at sleep with sleep hygiene, right? And that is a self-care modality. And I resisted it. It's the day in, day out methodical work of treating myself like I am the most precious thing in the world. And for me, being someone who didn't learn to value and appreciate my own tenderness and vulnerability as a child, it was the hardest thing in the world for me to do, was to recognize I need to nurture that and I need to take care of that, right? For me, most of my life, I just saw it as weakness and things that get in the way of me going out and conquering the world, right? All of those limitations. I've learned to understand that as my inner children speaking to me, right? Those types of feelings and wants and needs, those things that I need to tend to, right? And so that was my practice as I was getting off of these drugs, is maybe the best thing I can do right now is to get up and to get a glass of water. Maybe that's the best I can do. But that's self-care, right? I need to stay hydrated, and I've been crying, right? So I need to make sure that I've got fluids. And so self-care is what I use to replace these drugs, right? And so there's a million different forms, there's a million different approaches, and there's a million different lists with the 5 bullet points and stuff, and different things are going to be useful to different people. For me, it was for me to be able to do it, I needed to connect into me loving myself, right? In ways that I'd never experienced my whole life. What I would also say for myself is meditation. And of course, there's many different ideas about meditation. There's many different ways people meditate. And you look at mindfulness and how that connects into it. I found sort of well, Shambhala. I found a westernized version of Tibetan meditation, and that was essential in this process for me. Learning to meditate, learning to sit with myself instead of running away from myself is a core practice for me in my recovery. By running from myself, I mean not only drugs as medicators, right? I see me drugging myself is me running from myself, right? And I did it with alcohol. I did it with another thing I quit was cigarettes. So I did it with all kinds of chemicals. I did it with sugar and carbohydrates, right? I'm injecting myself with mood or mind altering things to help me regulate in ways that allow me not to experience an underlying discomfort, right? This is my perspective on it. So, I released all the street type drugs, and I released all the sort of, daily living type drugs, and I released the medication, the psychiatric drugs, right? But I also had to release a number of my other behaviors, process addictions, behavioral addictions. I can make an addiction out of anything, and I have out of most things. I am over the top. Historically in my life, I go over the top with everything: shopping, materialism, video games, movies. I can't stop on a Netflix binge. Whatever it is, it's always more. And I've recognized my propensity to do that is my desire to either numb or distract myself from feeling an underlying discomfort that I've carried with me my whole life. And in some sense, it's the discomfort of being human, right? I mean, no one comes out of their childhood without some dents and scratches. Being human, we have our injuries and we have our wounds that we need to tend to. Meditation for me was learning the practice of being able to sit with that and to not medicate. Because as we've learned, with a neuroplastic brain, every time you reach for that and don't allow yourself to feel, every time I don't allow myself to feel and to reach for something to dull that, I'm restructuring my brain. And I'm restructuring my brain to not be as willing to sit with the discomfort the next time. Meditation for me has been a practice in learning to sit with discomfort. Now, I'm grateful that during meditation, I don't always experience that, and I've done week-long meditation retreats and stuff, and I've gone to places of bliss. And so, in the same way that I had experienced some of those negative trips or bad trip type sort of states of being, I've come to experience positive states of being now too, very expansive, beautiful, like that. To me, what I would associate with, again, an inner child, that awe, that wonder, that beauty, that creativity, all of those things. It could be a very expansive state. And meditation, if I sit quietly, even just not even using the word meditate, if I just learn to sort of sit quietly and notice whatever arises, that there's beauty in that, right? But if I'm pushing away all the bad stuff, then I don't allow myself to sit quietly to appreciate the good stuff too. So meditation has been a key part in me learning to do this. And I meditated brutally when I first started. I'm just going to sit here. I'm just going to have panic attacks. I'm just going to sit here through the whole time. And I mean, that's, in that same all or nothing way, I approached my recovery and the taper in the same sort of way, right? So I had to learn to do that gently and to recognize that there are times I need to get up. And if I can find a harm reduction way of distracting, like maybe a Netflix video instead of alcohol, that there's ways of being kind to myself in how it is that I do this practice, as opposed to the critic driving the practice. So am I going to do this practice of meditation from the place of a loving inner parent or an inner loving caregiver with compassion, or am I going to do it from that critic place? And so again, meditation has been a place to work with those experiences. Every time it's a choice. It didn't feel like a choice at first, but it's become more of a choice. Am I going to turn more of a choice? Am I going to turn towards that critic again and allow that to sort of be what moves me? Or am I going to try to find something to awaken and strengthen something more gentle in myself? Meditation has been a central practice for me with that. I think there's other things that, again, with the self-care exercise, there were days where I just could not get off the floor, and I would have I would literally wake up usually mid-morning because my sleep, I would be on the floor and just in pain. I had these flu-like symptoms. I had disorientation. I had paranoia and agoraphobia. I mean, when I was getting off these drugs, it felt inescapable. I had a massage wand, those things you do on your back. I would do that, and I would do that on my body slowly, and just these cramps that I would get cramps. It was just, so every day was just this practice in self-care and trying to come from a place of gentleness with it. Like I was a small child who was sick or injured, right? That's what I had to do. And I had to find that connection to tenderness, because to me, that healing needed to come from that place. It wasn't going to come from that critic and that brutal beat myself up place. It just wasn't going to happen that way. So, I mean, it's still a central practice in my life, but so self-care, anything. And so exercise, it got to a place where I could go for a walk, right? I could walk around the block. And to me, to recognize, I mean, the critic would come in and be like, we used to bench 220 pounds. What's going on here? Like, what's the problem? No, like today I can walk and I can go around the block, and that's okay. That's the best I can do today. And to come to a place of, I mean, a 12-step program would call it step one, surrender, right? And just a place where it's like that, I can't do any more than that today. I just can't in this moment. And to come to a place of acceptance around that, acceptance of my limitations. Yeah. And I still have to go there, right? I mean, it's still a practice for me. I still will overdo it. I still put too much on my plate. I still go seek that approval. I still do these things. It's going to be a lifelong practice, but I feel like the foundation is there for me. And I also want to say, things are better enough now to the extent that I am back in school, right? I'm not working yet. I'm close to earning money again. I've been doing a lot of volunteer work, right? Been doing a lot of writing actually for the ACA program, working with beginners, and finding a lot of passion in that and having a lot of success with that. And it's been allowing me to sort of get into that environment of being productive in the world and having commitments in the world. So it's been really, really good. But I'm back in school now. So here I am, age 50, right? And it's not really where I saw myself being or wanted to be, but here I am. And my first degree was in psychology. And coming out of school, I worked at a child and adolescent psychiatric facility. I worked at a gay and lesbian youth program. I'm gay. And so part of what I've been dealing with too is coming out and coming out not only sort of to the world, which I did that at age 21, but coming out sort of internally too, coming out to the truth of just how difficult it was being 11, 12, 13, and emerging into a sexuality right in the middle of the burgeoning of the AIDS epidemic and hearing gay plague and things like that, right? So it's embracing all of my truths and bringing that forward, right? So anyway, that's what I did. I was in that field coming out of school, and I thought I was going to do that, but really, quite honestly, I ran into my childhood wounding and had to run a different direction. So I took a break from that, went back to school again, created my own company that ended up doing really well in the tattoo industry, and did that for a while. But no, I'm back in school. My passion is healing, quite honestly. My passion is truth and whatever it takes to get there, quite honestly, for myself. And then if I can help other people do that too, that's what I want to do. So I'm getting a master's in social work, and my plan is to be a therapist. And my plan is to work with people around trauma, childhood wounding. I think social wounding, issues around sexual orientation or gender or race. There's a lot of wounding that we can experience in this culture as compounding traumas. But also around getting off of these drugs, that I know I have something to offer, having gone through this experience. And I still have rough days and rough times, and I will. Part of that's still that I know I'm healing, and part of it is just being human. But I have things that I can offer this world, and I'm more in my truth than I ever have been. I'm more in healing my wounds. I know I'm rediscovering my gifts also. as I heal my wounds, my gifts become more accessible and I trust them more. And I can say that today. So I still have to go gently and I have to ease back into this. I still am prone to taking on too much and moving too quickly. So I have to kind of consistently work with that. But I'm in school and I have things to offer this world and I'm looking forward to doing that.
Well, Lou, you're absolutely awesome. I mean, I can just tell that you're just a good person. Just, by the way that you talk, the way that you just express yourself, you're just a great person. Just like goodness comes out of you, and it was really really great to hear you share this story. It was honestly it really helped me too with sort of understanding where I'm at right now, and what's important really, because yeah, it's been kind of rough to sort of focus on what's important, especially now, but this was so great for me. So thank you for sharing all of that. You're awesome, and I really hope that life treats you better. um and yeah, that you from now on you get everything that you want, everything that you need. And school is good. School is great. It's I feel like honestly, partly, if I could stay in school forever, I would.
Mm-hmm.
um, so yeah, it was so great. It was so great, honestly. Just to hear all of that. And thank you, honestly. Just thank you so much for being so brave and sharing that with me. I really appreciate it. Yeah, and it
Thank,
was great.
thank you too, Georgia. And
Yeah.
I knew from your initial email that you sent or the little message that you sent, I knew that you were someone who wanted to live in her truth too. I just knew that about you. And just in the way that you write and that you are connected to your gifts and you're connected to your passions and you will find ways to bring that into the world. And you are going through a maturing process as we all are through this COVID piece. And I'm sure you did not expect to be having a COVID experience, in school, and you're making the best of it. But I appreciate your compassion and I appreciate your gifts that you've been sharing with me. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I really, really appreciate to hear that. Yeah, just so grateful for having this time to talk to you. And honestly, I would love to keep in contact with you, and if you want to like share how you're doing at some point, or like you just anything, I'm here. This was amazing, and I yeah, I don't know what else to say, but really thank you for all of this. It was
I
just
really appreciate your interest and your curiosity, and I appreciate you holding space for me to share this today. If there are other things that come up as you're, working on your project, or something else you want me to speak of, the areas that you want me to fill out, happy to do that. You talked about having some photos, and if that's something that you want to do, again, whatever your vision is around this, I'm happy to support that and how it is that I can. So, whatever else that it is that you need from me, you let me know.
Yeah, sure. Photos would be great. Anything that you, again, feel comfortable sharing, anything that speaks to you, um, any moments that come to mind in particular, just whatever you're willing to share is really appreciated. I think
Well,
photos will go great with this. Yep.
okay, I'll look through photos and see what I can come up with that. As you're putting this together, it might be, oh, hey, maybe you have a photo during that time or something.
Yeah.
Let me just skim on these questions to make sure. I think I talked to Light before. Okay. Maybe you asked about that road trip that I did,
Yeah.
and maybe I'll share on that if you want to hear that.
Yeah. Actually, I kind of want to hear that just on a more personal and
So, because it's kind of a kooky thing, quite honestly. So, I also want to say about a little bit more about when my life crashed. So, when my life crashed good. So, my business that I had built that was doing well was not doing well anymore. Um, and it was something that was way beyond, well, mostly beyond anything that I could have done about it. To just sort of run its course, as internet companies sometimes do. So, but I had a contentious relationship with a business partner, and that was very tough for me. At the time my life crashed, my sister was having some health issues, and that was something that was very tough. I helped her out. She lived near me in Colorado at the time. Eventually, she moved in with me, and so that was a very difficult piece. And then I had a breakup, and that breakup was a breakup where I was the one that I finally, I mean, in all my relationships, I was sort of the dumper, right? I was the one that was like, yeah, I'm out of here. This isn't working. In this particular relationship, it was sort of, I had the sense that, you know what, I've tried this dating thing a number of times. I sort of have gone through this cycle a number of times. I think this is the one. This is going to be now. And I was the one that got dumped. And in a sense, I was the one that got dumped. What I could say for sure is it hit a wounded spot in me that no other person who I had been with touched. And so it was a perfect storm. And so as I've been doing sort of the inner work, what I realized was that business partner who had a contentious relationship was really my dad. And in a way, when my sister got sick, that was really my mom, who got sick and died when I was 26. And that relationship that ended was me meeting that younger version of myself and allowing him to be touched by someone else, and the vulnerability that I felt and the devastation of feeling abandoned in that situation. So that was the context of my life crash. And it was a pretty tough place to be. Thankfully, what I can say is, at least on the point of my sister, is that my sister was able to rebound back from that, and so she's doing much better. So that's good. On that trip that I took. So yeah. So anyway, when my life crashed, that was pretty much 2014 going into 2015. So 2014 was when I got off the drugs. I reinstated at the end of 2014. And at that point, things were really falling apart. And my brother, I was living in Colorado. My brother and his family were in the Tampa area in Florida. And he suggested, you know what, maybe it's just time for a change in your life. And why don't you, my sister was living with me at the time. I had another boyfriend after the other one, and decided, let's just sell everything. We'll move down to Florida. That's what we're going to do, right? The geographic cure. I mean, I was in such a compromised state anyway. I was just like, I don't know what to, so I just did it. So moved down to Florida, and I hated it. And so after 2 months, it was very clear that what I was going through was not what my boyfriend at the time signed up for. And so after about 2 months, he went back to Colorado. And I was living with my sister, and she was continuing to get better. But I did not want to be in Florida. I am a cold weather person. I am a mountain person. Not to mention, in high school, I had lived in Florida, and I had a lot of bad memories of that. And quite honestly, during that taper process, I was going to be physically uncomfortable no matter where I was. Anyway, that's me leading up to saying I needed to go out on a journey to try to find something different, and probably to search for something out there that I was looking for on the inside. But I got it in my head I was going to go back to Colorado and visit that, and sort of make a journey out of it. Maybe find a new home. I don't know what I was thinking, but I went on a road trip, and it was the summer of 2015, and it turned out to be a 9,000-mile road trip and 108 days. Me going through my taper, right? And me having gone to ACA and opened up the floodgates of my childhood wounding, me having started EMDR with a therapist and opening all those gates. So was it the best idea? Probably not, but that's what I did. And it was by myself. It was a lone road trip. And wow, I mean, the things I did on that, and part of it too was that I had been seeing a practitioner in Florida, sort of a spiritual practitioner, and she sort of put the bug in me. You need to go find yourself and go out into nature and, beat some drums or something. And I'm just like, maybe I do. I don't really know. So anyway, I was like, I'm going to go out into nature and beat some drums. So anyway, I signed up for a vision quest in Denver. So I knew that was my first stop. And that vision, it was a queer quest, right? It was for LGBT folks. And I really didn't have a lot of experience camping. So before I left on Amazon, I ordered a bunch of camping stuff and loaded it up in my car, not really knowing what I needed or whatever, but figuring I would go there and figure things out, right? So I went there, and it was for they did give you some preparation, and it was a beautiful program, and actually highly recommended. They don't have just LBGT programs, but they do sort of these outdoor, connect to nature, connect to yourself, and it's the School of Lost Borders. They're based out of California, but a beautiful program. Highly recommend it. So they had a gay version of it, and I decided I was going to go do that. So I showed up, and appreciative. They sort of, here's how you set up a tent, right? I mean, it was that basic, um, but they had a lot of ritual around it, which was really beautiful for me. And I haven't got into my spirituality as we've talked here, but I've always been a spiritual person, not religious, and had a lot of religious wounding, a lot of religious issues. But the idea of nature and ritual is something that resonated with me. And so, walking through a threshold in the four directions, and people that know some of that would know what I'm talking about. But I went out into nature, and, the day before I started the actual quest, you go out and you find your spot. And then the next day, very early in the morning, you go through a ritual and you become of a different world, right? A spiritual world. And I was out with a tent and a knife and 4 gallons of water for 4 days. And so talk about intensity, right? And talk about being with yourself. And so I had no contact with another human being for 4 days, sort of in the middle of a national forest in Colorado, with a tent and a knife and 4 gallons of water. So that was intense. And so really, those were the types of things that I did on that trip. I hiked a 14,000 foot mountain, and I went sort of off trail with another guy who was a camper, and sort of split went on. And so after Colorado, I drove out to California. I went through southern Utah and national parks, and I went to Death Valley in California. I went to Monterey Bay, and I did a week-long silent meditation retreat and just sat with myself and cooked internally, just cooking for 7 days. And then I went all the way up, and I'd seen the movie Wild, and a huge inspirational movie to me. You're smiling, so I know you know what I'm talking about. That was my inspiration. I'm going to go out, and she hiked the Pacific coast, and I was driving my thing. So and also, again, I had some contact with sort of this idea of Tibetan Buddhism, and I had sort of inducted myself into a lineage of Tibetan Buddhism. I was raised Jewish, but I guess now I'm Buddhist Jewish, so that's where I'm at. So that was the meditation retreat. It was a Tibetan Buddhist sort of thing, and a teacher who I still really appreciate and value. I won't say his name here, but who I really value. And from there, I went north, and I camped out in the redwoods in Northern California, and I went to Crater Lake, and I went to Mount St. Helens, and I drove the US 1 in Oregon, and I had to get to the Bridge of the Gods, because in Wild, that's where she ended her trip, and I love that. And then I went to Olympic National Park. And while I had profound, and then I ended up driving all the way north through the northern states to Montana, and had some adventures there, and then dropped down to Colorado again. I went out to Tennessee, and I won't mention the name of what I did there, but I did sort of a week-long psychological process with an organization based out of Tennessee. Well, I'll say it was on site, and it was pretty good. And the practitioners there were really very good. So, and then basically went back down to Florida, and being like, I guess I'm not going to leave Florida for right now. And I just, quite honestly, I need to stay put and stop running. But in Olympic National Park, I wrote about this in that little success story. I had an experience where I just felt like, it was things cracking open and breaking open, and layers of denial pulling away the whole time. But I had an experience where I had felt the depths of painful emotions in ways that I I don't think I'd ever experienced in my life. And I wrote that I just didn't know emotional pain could be physically that painful. And I was driving and I just pulled over to the side of the road, and it was sort of near the Hoh Forest in Washington State. And I just bawled and I just screamed, and it was just like, it felt like something primal releasing. But from that point forward, I sort of had this realization that releasing, that there was stuff in me that had been stored there for a very long time. And that as I released it, it decreased my anxiety. And that was a very important realization for me that I took away. That to me, depression and anxiety is stuffed truth. It's stuffed truth. And for me, healing was going to be going back to that truth, as painful as it is, and reclaiming it. And to feel the things that maybe as a child I couldn't feel, and that I learned to turn off, just naturally dissociating. Um, that opened up for me in a way that I will never forget. And I've carried that with me since. And I fully and completely believe anxiety and depression are stuffed truth. So for me, it's been about reclaiming my truth, and being able to sit with that inside myself, to be able to sit with my own truth, as uncomfortable as that has been at times, but to also learn how to bring that truth out into the world, and to do it in ways that come from a place of strength, quite honestly, to be able to stand in my own truth. And know when I need to set boundaries around that too, and to be able to do that. So in a sense, some of this ACA reparenting has actually been assertiveness training. I just didn't know it at the time. And so for me to not be seeking approval all the time, and not to be in that people pleasing place, but to put my own internal truth, my own inner children first, has been the central piece of my recovery too. So yes, that trip that I took, it was pretty epic. I called it my pilgrimage. I took a lot of photos from it, and I journaled. I've journaled the whole time. I've journaled all through my taper, and the success story that I wrote on surviving antidepressants was a lot. But maybe at some point a fuller story will come out. But that road trip was it was epic, and it was not based in gentleness. That's for sure. It was before I learned that lesson, but maybe that's what led me to the lesson. And so I don't regret it.
Thank you. Yeah.
And that's all I got to say about that.
Yeah, this reminds me, there was a point in my life where I wanted to do Santiago de Compostela. I don't know if you've heard of that, but that's basically like a pilgrimage. It's in Spain. It wasn't really for any religious reasons.
I have heard of that. It's a mountainous trip, right?
Yeah, it's a pretty long trip. People usually walk it, although I know some people bike it. But yeah, it's rough. It's actually yeah, it's rough. I haven't mustered the strength or braveness to go on it. Yeah, I think part of it was because I really wanted to do it someone else. But I think maybe doing it alone would be a completely different experience, and maybe that's something that I would want to do at some point. But yeah, it kind of reminded me of that a little bit.
I think that's something that we miss in our culture. We don't have rites of passage, and that Schools of Lost Borders is about rites of passage. And so, they have different ways of doing that. But, if you look at tribal cultures and you look at sort of the history of being human, there were rites of passage as we pass through different stages of life. And, again, being Jewish, I had a bar mitzvah, but, that's sort of like, it's the fluffy version of I think something probably that was probably had a lot more impact and meaning for many more people at a different point in history. So getting to a place of confronting oneself and one's limits, for me, getting to a place of confronting my limits, and not just physical limits, but sort of these psychological, emotional, and spiritual limits. There is, I think, healthy ways to do that, though. And my hope would be, and what I like about the School of Lost Borders is that they create a holding space for someone to do that. that there are outer boundaries around what it is that someone's doing within that. You have a lot of space to sort of really test that inner fortitude or whatever it is. But there's some outer boundaries, a safety holding container that's a part of that. And I think historically tribal cultures would, and it's not my area of expertise, but just sort of from what I've read and learned, that tribal cultures would create that holding space for someone to walk into in at least a reasonably understood to be safe way. But with the understanding that you walk into that and you don't know what's going to happen. So I'll encourage you to do it. And when I graduated from college, my first degree, I did a backpacking trip around Europe on my own for half of it. And I never made it to Eastern Europe, which I really wanted to do. But that was another time where it was, I didn't speak a lot of languages. I went there, my dad gave me a Euro pass, and I had a budget of about $15 a day for everything, including the food and
Lodging.
yeah, lot where you just completely lost the word. Give me a second here. Where students will travel and the places that they stay.
Like hostels or something?
Hostels, thank you. So yeah, 15 to 20 bucks a day for food and hostel and everything. And I had my Eurail ticket, but that was about it. So yeah, at the time, it was a rite of passage. So, but I think too, what I realized with that trip, so I went on that trip, which was me sort of confronting myself in the outer world. But what I realized when I returned was that I needed to sit still and do that, try to find the same sort of courage for an inner journey that I needed to make. And I needed to sit still for that. So, I had my outer pilgrimage, but then I also had my inner pilgrimage. And that taper was a huge part of that inner pilgrimage. So yeah, I encourage you to find spaces and ways that feel right for you to do that.
Yeah, I'll try my best. Yeah, definitely.
But
I
you're
need
kind of
to.
doing it now. You kind of are.
Yeah. I guess so.
Yeah,
Yeah, not in ways that I've imagined, but I guess so.
that's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Well, thank you so much.
you
Honestly,
bet.
it was great. Thank you for giving me so much of your time. I really appreciate it for sharing
Yeah.
this. Super helpful. And yeah, you're awesome. You really are.
Cool. All right. Well, let me know what you need from me, and I'll look forward to hearing more from you as your project develops.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Thanks, Georgia.
Bye. Take care.